When I decided to visit my Uncle Martin, I had no idea that this visit would end up changing everything for me. My family has always been a little different, but I had always viewed my uncle as the quiet, reserved type. He wasn't one for big family gatherings, and often preferred to keep to himself. He was kind, sure, but never too engaging, and always seemed to retreat into his own world. I remember the day I arrived perfectly, bright and sunny, the kind of afternoon that seemed to promise everything would be just as it always had been. The house was unusually quiet, though. Usually, there would be a little more noise, some chatter from my aunt or cousin, but this time, it felt different. It was as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for something. I knocked on the door, and my uncle opened it with a smile, though it seemed strained. His usual warmth was there, but his eyes were clouded, like something was weighing on him. He welcomed me in, and I could tell he was trying to keep up appearances, but there was an unease that hung in the air. "How have you been?" he asked, his voice soft, but with a certain tension I couldn't quite place. "I've been good," I replied, giving him a hug. "How about you?" "Everything all right." He smiled again, but didn't answer immediately. It was almost as if he hadn't heard my question, or maybe he didn't want to answer. Instead, he gestured toward the living room. "Come on in. Make yourself comfortable." I sat down, but there was this unspoken thing between us that I couldn't ignore. The house felt unusually still, and my uncle, despite his kind demeanor, felt distant. It was like there was something on his mind that he wasn't sharing, and it left me feeling oddly out of place. The afternoon passed with little conversation. He offered me some tea, and we sat in silence for a while, his eyes occasionally drifting off as if lost in thought. I tried to strike up a conversation, but it was like talking to a brick wall. He wasn't rude, but he was distant in a way that I had never experienced before. It wasn't like him to be so closed off, so I couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Later, I went to the bathroom, and on my way back, I passed by his study. I noticed the door was slightly open, and for some reason, I felt drawn to it. I wasn't one to pry, but something about the room called to me. I pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the old wooden desk, papers scattered across it, and a small box sitting in the corner. It wasn't unusual to see things left out of place, but this box, it was odd. It looked old, with brass hinges and a small worn-out lock. Curiosity got the best of me. I stepped inside, looking around quickly before my eyes landed on the box. It was too intriguing to ignore. I reached for it, my hands shaking slightly as I unlatched the lock and opened it. Inside were yellowed letters and photographs, many of which were in black and white. I picked up one of the photos, my fingers brushing over the glassy surface. My heart stopped when I recognized the faces, my uncle, but with a woman I had never seen before. There were more photos, many of them with this woman, and all of them were from years ago. She seemed to be very special to him, based on the way he looked at her in the photos. Some of the letters were handwritten, and as I started to read, I realized they were love letters, full of passion and longing, but written in a time long before I had ever known my uncle. There was so much emotion in the words, and I could feel it as I read. I could almost hear his voice in my head as I read them, so full of pain and love. It was clear that this was a chapter of his life he had never shared with anyone, not even with his own family. I continued to read, piecing together fragments of his past that he had kept hidden from everyone. The letters spoke of a love he had once had, a relationship that had ended in heartbreak and regret. The woman in the photographs had been the love of his life, but for reasons unknown to me, they had parted ways. My mind was racing as I closed the box, my heart heavy with this new knowledge. I had never known my uncle as anything other than the quiet, reserved man he was. But this was a side of him that no one had ever seen. I felt guilty for invading his privacy, but at the same time, a strange sense of connection stirred inside me. He wasn't just my uncle. He was a man who had loved deeply, who had lived through heartbreak, and who was still carrying the weight of those lost memories. Just then, I heard footsteps behind me, and I turned to find my uncle standing in the doorway, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. His face softened when he saw what I had found. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was as if time had stopped, and we were both caught in this strange, vulnerable moment. "You found it, didn't you?" he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. I nodded, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and sympathy. I didn't want you to find that, he continued, stepping into the room. There are parts of my past that I've never shared with anyone, and I thought I could keep it that way. But you deserve to know, I guess. I stared at him, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to ask him everything. Why he never talked about her. Why he had never mentioned his past. But I could see the sadness in his eyes, and something inside me told me not to push it. Instead, I just sat there listening. My life, my choices, they weren't easy, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I loved her, but sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes, life takes you down a different path, and you're left with nothing but the memories. I felt a lump in my throat as I listened to him. For the first time, I saw him not as my uncle, but as a person who had been through things, who had experienced love and loss in ways I couldn't fully understand. That night, as we sat down to dinner, the atmosphere was different. My uncle was more open than I had ever seen him, and I realized that discovering this part of his life had bridged a gap between us. The mysterious silence I had once felt had turned into understanding, and in a strange way, it had brought us closer. In the days that followed, I visited him more often. Our conversations became deeper, less superficial. We talked about his past, about the things he had kept hidden. I learned that my uncle wasn't just the quiet man I had always known. He was a person who had lived, who had loved, and who had faced the kind of heartache that most people never talk about. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he began to share more details about his past. He told me about how he had met this woman, how they had fallen in love, and how their relationship had been filled with both joy and turmoil. He spoke of the moments they had shared, the dreams they had built together, and the pain they had both endured when it all fell apart. She was the one, he said, his voice filled with a mix of nostalgia and regret. But sometimes, even the strongest love can't overcome the challenges life throws at you. We tried, we really did, but in the end it just wasn't enough. I listened intently, feeling a deep sense of empathy for him. It was as if I was seeing a whole new side of my uncle, a side that was vulnerable and human. He wasn't just the distant, mysterious figure I had always known. He was a man with a heart full of love and pain. As the days turned into weeks, our bond grew stronger. I found myself looking forward to our visits, to the conversations that were filled with both laughter and tears. We shared stories, we laughed at old memories, and we cried over the losses we had both experienced. It was a time of healing for both of us, a time to connect on a deeper level. One day, as we were walking through the park, he turned to me and said, "You know, I never thought I'd be able to share this part of my life with anyone. But you've given me the courage to open up, to face the past and move forward. Thank you for that." I felt a warmth spread through me as I looked at him. It was a moment of pure connection, a moment that would stay with me forever. I realized that this visit, this unexpected journey into my uncle's past, had changed not just him, but me as well. It had taught me the importance of understanding, of empathy, and of the power of shared experiences. As I left his house that day, I knew that our relationship had been forever altered. We were no longer just uncle and nephew. We were friends, confidants, and partners in this journey called life. And as I walked away, I carried with me a newfound appreciation for the complexities of love, loss, and the enduring power of human connection. What I discovered that day was more than just a collection of old photos and letters. It was the key to understanding my uncle in a way that no one else ever had. It was the beginning of a new kind of relationship, one built on honesty and vulnerability. And I knew that, no matter what, this chapter of our lives would never be forgotten. It was a reminder that even in the most unexpected places, we can find the connections that make us who we are.